Operant conditioning and reinforcement. Module overview. This module covers another type of learning, operant conditioning. We will discuss how operant conditioning differs from classical conditioning, the three-term contingency of behavior, and how to apply operant conditioning to animal training. Learning objectives. By the end of this module, students will 1. Categorize behavior based on components of operant conditioning, antecedent, behavior, and consequence. 2. Describe generalization and discrimination in operant conditioning. And 3. Explain extinction of operant conditioning behavior. After completing this module, you will be required to read B&B Chapter 14 and Donaldson Chapter 3, pages 53 through 77. The required videos will be attached to the description box, and you will have a journal entry due and reading quiz number 4. Operant conditioning. In classical conditioning, reflexive behavior is elicited by a stimulus that occurs before the behavior occurs. Classical conditioning deals only with reflexive or involuntary behaviors. The term elicit is only applicable to reflexive behavior. Most of the behavior that occurs, however, are not automatic, reflexive behaviors. In fact, the majority of behavior is voluntary or operant. Operant behaviors include coming to class, eating breakfast, and studying. These behaviors are voluntary. They are not automatic behaviors that occur in response to a stimulus. Unlike reflexes, operant behavior is controlled by what follows the behavior or the behavior's consequence. Three-term contingency. In order to understand and evaluate operant behavior, we must first be familiar with a three-term contingency. The three-term contingency includes three components or terms: A, the antecedent; B, the behavior; C, the consequence. An antecedent is the context or setting in which a response occurs. This can be as broad as inside or outside, or as specific as the verbal command given. Some antecedent cues to the dog that reinforcement is available, called a discriminative stimulus, while other signals that reinforcement is not available, the S deltas. More on this later. The behavior, obviously, is what the animal does. Theoretically, we could argue the definition of behavior. However, for our purpose, behavior is anything an animal does. The target behavior is the behavior we are concerned about at a specific time. This may be a problem behavior that needs modified or a new behavior that needs to be learned. Consequences are what follows the behavior. Often this is a reinforcer or reward, but it can also be punishment or maybe nothing at all happen after a behavior occurs. Watch the following video closely. Identify several target behaviors and the antecedents and consequences of each. The three-term contingency video will be attached to the comments. One type of consequence is reinforcement. Reinforcement is a consequence that strengthens behaviors when it is delivered after the behavior occurs. A positive reinforcer is something that is added after a behavior that leads to an increase in that behavior. Examples of positive reinforcers are delivery of food after a dog sits, getting an A after studying for an exam, and a shy child getting candy for vocalizing. It's important to remember that reinforcers are not universal. If something is presented after a behavior and behavior does not strengthen or increase as a result, then the stimulus is not a reinforcer. The functional definition of reinforcement is that it strengthens behavior. Not all individuals will respond the same way to a presumed reinforcer. For example, some people may not like Swedish fish, so providing this after a target behavior will not likely strengthen that behavior. It is the same for all animals, including dogs. The dog's behavior determines whether or not a stimulus is a reinforcer. We can assume that several things will serve as reinforcers for dogs. These are often things that are necessary for survival of all species, such as food, water, play, and access to conspecifics. However, certain types of food may be reinforcing for some dogs and not others, like carrots. Antecedents can also affect the value of reinforcement. For example, after eating Thanksgiving dinner, food may not be a strong reinforcer. Conversely, not eating for several days may make even a non-appetizing food item reinforcing. Antecedent stimuli that affect the value of reinforcers are called establishing and abolishing operations. Establishing operations increase the value of a reinforcer, such as food deprivation increases the reinforcing value of food, and abolishing operations decrease the value of a reinforcer, such as being full reduces the reinforcing value of food. Premack's principle. Other behaviors can serve as reinforcer. Premack's principle states that more probable behaviors will reinforce less probable behaviors. So when given a choice, a behavior that an animal engages in more frequently can be used to reinforce less frequent behavior. This is often called Grandma's Law, because it is the same method used by grandmothers. Eat your vegetables and then you can have dessert. Premack's principle is put into action using the Nothing in Life is Free, or NILIF principle. This dog training standard requires that dogs earn everything that may be a reward. For example, dogs must sit before being fed, look to the owner before going outside, wait until instructed to approaching another person or dog, etc. This is a great way to train calm behavior throughout every interaction with your dog, utilizing the reward that occur in everyday life. The Premack principle can be used to train a dog to walk nicely on a leash. Low probability behavior by using sniffing, a high probable behavior as a reinforcer. It can be used to train a recall as demonstrated in the video attached to the comments. It is also used when teaching a dog to give an item. Schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement can be delivered under several different conditions. Reinforcement schedules are rules that state under what conditions a reinforcer will be delivered. There are multiple types of reinforcement schedules. We will discuss only 3 of them: continuous reinforcement, CRF, fixed ratio schedule, FR, and variable ratio schedule, VR. Continuous reinforcement schedule. With a CRF, a reinforcer is delivered after every response. In other words, one occurrence of the target behavior earns one reinforcer. An example of a CRF operating in real life is a vending machine. It is expected that every time you perform the behavior required, the machine will dispense your snack or drink. Fixed ratio schedule. A fixed ratio schedule specifies that a certain number of responses must occur prior to a reinforcer being delivered. Examples of a FR schedule are video games in which you must collect a certain number of tokens to earn an extra life. The number of tokens required is fixed. It stays the same for each extra life. In dog training, an FR schedule may occur when the dog is required to perform several behaviors in a row before earning a reinforcer. For example, opening the fridge, picking up a water bottle, giving the water bottle to the trainer, and closing the door. The entire sequence occurs before the dog is provided a food reward and is a FR4 schedule because 4 behaviors are required prior to reinforcement. Fixed interval schedule. An interval schedule deals with duration of time instead of number of behaviors. A fixed interval schedule is when a reinforcer is delivered after a specified period of time occurs and a behavior occurs. In other words, the first response after a specified behavior or time has elapsed and reinforced. Imagine you are waiting for a bus. The arrival time is 10 minutes away. Your behavior of looking in the direction of the bus will increase in frequency the closer you are to the 10 minutes being up. At the end of that 10 minutes, your behavior of looking in the direction of the bus will be reinforced by actually seeing the bus. This is a FI 10-minute schedule. Fixed interval schedules produce scalloped responding, as shown in the graph. Responding increases in frequency toward the end of the interval. A dog example of a FI schedule is related to separation distress in dogs. Dogs are often put in kennels when their owners leave for work for about the same amount of time each day. Dogs may engage in boredom behavior such as chewing or barking after a certain amount of time being alone. After a certain interval, the owner returns, accidentally rewarding the dog's inappropriate behavior. Over repetitions, the dog learns to increase this response close to the owner's return, which exasperates the problem over time. Consequences: negative reinforcement. If positive reinforcement is adding something that increases behavior, what do you think negative reinforcement is? Negative means something is taken away, and reinforcement still means that behavior is strengthened. With negative reinforcement, the thing taken away is often something aversive. For each of the examples in the diagram above, what is the target behavior? What is removed that strengthens this behavior? Extinction bursts. While using extinction of operant behavior, there is always a possibility that an extinction burst will occur. An extinction burst is when the target behavior is no longer followed by reinforcement and the behavior increases in intensity and/or frequency as a result. Let's go back to our vending machine example. What typically occurs when a person does not get the snack once they pay and select? How do people respond? How many times do people continue to put money into the machine before they engage in this behavior? Contrast this with gambling behavior. A video in the description will show another example of extinction burst. Spontaneous recovery. Sometimes even after a behavior has gone through extinction, the behavior reoccurs after an elapsed time period. If you are aware of this possibility and are sure to not reinforce it, spontaneous recovery should not be a problem. Extinction with negative reinforcement. Extinction is withholding a reinforcer. When a behavior is negatively reinforced, the removal of something is the reinforcer. This can get confusing. So how do we put the behavior on extinction? We don't remove the something. It helps to use an example. Let's say you are trimming your dog's nails, A. Your dog growls, B. And you stop trimming his nails, C. What is the reinforcer here? You are removing the nail trimmer after the dog growls, a negative reinforcement. So how would you put the behavior of growling in this situation on extinction? You would continue to trim the nails even though the dog is growling. This is not a good idea, by the way. This is also called escape extinction because you are no longer allowing escape of nail trimming. Superstitious behavior. Reinforcement can be intentionally delivered after a behavior in order to strengthen the behavior, but it can also unintentionally reinforce behavior. When behavior occurs because it has been coincidentally or accidentally followed by reinforcement, even though the behavior does not cause the reinforcement to occur, the behavior is called superstitious behavior. B.F. Skinner demonstrated the development of superstitious behavior using pigeons in operant chambers. Skinner programmed the delivery of reinforcement, access to grain, for every 15 seconds. Access to grain was provided every 15 seconds, regardless of the pigeon's behavior. The majority of the pigeons in this experiment, 6 out of 8, developed certain behaviors in between grain access. Their behaviors were not related to the delivery of grain. However, they were engaging in some behavior when the grain was presented. The pigeon's behavior was superstitiously reinforced by the access to grain that followed a certain behavior close in time.